So have you ever had a frustrating day at work, not gotten what you set out to do done, and had someone who was completely outside the situation make a suggestion on how you could tackle your professional issue differently? Well, this used to happen to me a lot when I was an architect. And sometimes I felt just plain annoyed. I wanted to say to my helpful colleague, you don't really understand the complexities of this design, or remind them, hey, I already tried that and it didn't work. I wasn't always grateful for advice. But sometimes, if we're willing to listen, the suggestion turns out to be just the solution we need. Perhaps we will cast our nets in a different direction and we will come out with a different result. Will you pray with me, please? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
So Peter in today's gospel lesson is a little bit like the expert. He's an experienced fisherman. He owns a boat. And some describe him as a little rough, action-oriented, perhaps prone to violence. Witness that he does cut off the ear of a Roman soldier later in the story. Perhaps the Peter of today would be a fisherman off the coast of Maine or Cape Cod, played by Ben Affleck in the film version, spending his nights on the water with his buddies. I love the term partner as translated in our story today. He spends most of his time with other men, working all night out on the Sea of Galilee. In the morning, they must clean and maintain their nets before they can get some rest. Imagine Peter, who was still known as Simon at this point in the story, and his group of partners, tired and hungry, cleaning and mending their nets after a frustrating night of not catching any fish. They might be noticing, somewhere in the background of their vision, a large crowd has formed on the shore, and they are pressing in on the carpenter who's begun to be a teacher and a healer in the area. Jesus hops into Peter's boat so he can get some distance from the crowd and find a good place to teach from. And Peter jumps in to row Jesus out a little ways and then wades ashore to finish working on the nets. Then just as Peter and the guys are getting ready to go home, Jesus makes a suggestion. They ought to try again on the fishing thing. Go out a little further this time. Put into the deeper water. Look again. Go deeper. I imagine perhaps a few curses coming out of Peter's mouth. Peter's reaction might have been cleaned up a little by Luke. He starts to argue back. We've tried all night, he tells Jesus, and nothing happened. But he goes ahead and does what Jesus says anyway. He knows Jesus is not your average person, and despite being frustrated, tired, hungry, and done for the night, Peter agrees to cast his net once more. This time it comes up full, bursting with fish. And this is what's famous about the story in some ways, this miraculous catch of fish. And this may be the point of the story for some. The story seems to tell us if we listen to Jesus, our nets will be full, we will prosper and benefit by our discipleship. This catch of fish is yet another sign in this Epiphany season, a sign like the turning of water into wine, that Jesus has power in the material world, that Jesus provides abundantly. And you can see how the story might be used as an illustration of a certain way of interpreting the gospel. The school of thought that says through faith, you will be rewarded by health and wealth. If you do good things will happen to you. If you follow the right path, you will prosper. Reward comes to the righteous. This is a familiar mentality. And don't get me wrong, much of it is biblically based. But this outlook has a shadow side. How do we understand it when bad things happen to good people? I was chatting with my hairdresser this week, and she told me of a tragedy in her family. Her husband's cousin's son, a 15-year-old, had been killed in a car crash in Georgia. She had been at the funeral along with many family members and friends. And she said it was one of the worst days of her life. The funeral was heartbreaking. She told her mother-in-law that this is where she started to doubt that old adage that everything happens for a reason. That God's plan actually involved the death of a 15-year-old boy. Her mother-in-law retorted, "You are not allowed to doubt. You are not allowed to doubt." Can you imagine a faith group where you are not allowed to doubt? Where questions and curiosity are shut down? I'm so grateful for this Pilgrim congregation. It genuinely is a place where we can be honest and bring our questions. I remember a similar experience when I was a hospital chaplain, and a woman remarking to me that she didn't understand how an accidental death of her family member could have happened when she had always been such a good Christian. I've recently been reading a book by Kate Bowler. Have you heard of her? She's a professor at Duke Divinity School who specializes in studying the American phenomenon of megachurches and the prosperity gospel. She also happened to have been diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer at the age of 35. She spent her 20s studying and visiting and experiencing megachurches across the US. She soon learned that when you were asked to turn to the person next to you, often in stadium seating in auditoriums filled with more than 2,000 people, and ask how they were, there was only one way you were supposed to respond. You were supposed to say you were blessed. No negatives, no reality, no, I haven't been feeling well this week, or someone I love died. The answer had to be positive. You couldn't quite tell the truth. You had to be blessed. And part of the prosperity gospel phenomenon she discovered was this sense of keeping things positive and upbeat somehow became a power where you could control things like your health and your wealth. Apparently, there are over 1,600 mega churches in this country, some with more than 40,000 members. And you can see why they're popular, with celebrity preachers and promises of good fortune and perfect health, a formula that leads to success in human terms and a certain sense of control. Yet this prosperity gospel net is not wide enough to capture what it's really like to be a human being. In her book, No Cure for Being Human and Other Truths I Need to Hear, a follow-up to her memoir, Everything Happens for a Reason, and Other Lies I Have Loved. Don't you like these titles? Kate Bowler writes about the finitude of life, how we don't actually have the limitless possibilities we think we do, how American culture always suggests that we can be better, have a more perfect body, a more successful career, and a more comfortable lifestyle if we just try hard enough. Yet the reality for all of us is that life is never perfect, and it ends. This isn't a point of view that fills stadiums, yet there is something freeing about this more realistic view of life. It's like taking that deep breath and accepting life just as it is, not how we would like it to be, or how the prevailing culture suggests it should be. This is where we begin the real spiritual journey, grounded in reality, not fantasy. In the appendix of her book, Kate Bowler lists a couple of cliches we often hear and her alternative wording to them. When she was facing her cancer, the oncology social worker urged, make a bucket list. Yet she realized a life is never wrapped up like a book or a movie. It's never finished or completed, perfectly done, even when it's over. She often heard people say, no regrets. Her alternative for this is admit you have regrets. Everyone does. Facing the past is part of facing the future. She replaces the frequent urging to be present with the reality that in our minds, we toggle between the past, the present, and the future, all for good reasons. And here's my favorite. Instead of everything happens for a reason, we must learn to face uncertainty with courage. Accept with courage that life is uncertain. And we are not perfectibility projects. We are humans with ups and downs. We don't always prosper. We're not always well. Peter from our gospel this morning wasn't a perfect man, far from it. When Peter experienced the miraculous catch of fish, he falls to the ground. His reaction is, go away from me, for I am sinful. Peter didn't have an advanced degree or a brand new car or an exciting Instagram account. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't even close. Yet Jesus calls him. Peter says, I'm not worthy. I'm just a regular guy, a rough and tumble fisherman. But Jesus says, you are just the sort of person I need. The good news in today's gospel is Jesus takes us as we are, with all our faults and issues, with all our humanness, with frailty and sinfulness. Let's not forget Peter denies Jesus 3 times. Yet Peter is the rock upon whom Jesus builds his church. Peter has some qualities that Jesus can use. He takes action. He's willing to change. He's not stuck. He leaves the big catch of fish on the shore, leaves everything behind, and follows. Yes, Peter makes mistakes. He continually falls short, but he keeps going. He doesn't give up even when Jesus says to him, get behind me, Satan. He doesn't understand all that Jesus is doing, but he keeps following and he keeps trying. And I want to consider this morning, are there places in our own lives and in the life of this church where we could use some advice from good old Peter? Is there something in your life that God has been nudging you to do? Are we holding back on taking action, thinking the time is not right or the circumstances are just not so yet? Whether we are called to take leadership in championing the oppressed, or simply we hear an inner voice urging us to make a change in our personal lives. Sometimes we just need to take that first step and trust. This is the key. Trust that the Spirit will guide us along the way. The first step is always to respond when we hear the call to say, here I am, Lord. Let me help in this radical project of putting love in place of hate. Let me be an instrument of your peace and a creator of your justice. Not to hold back, waiting to be ready. Peter was not ready in any way, yet he took the leap. And maybe that's the best, most human thing we can do. Not try to perfect ourselves, but embrace our unfinished messiness and be responsive to Jesus just as we are. Perhaps we go from the prosperity gospel to a much more freeing reality gospel. With raw honesty, we can say that we do not always understand, that life can be really hard, but we keep going. And when Jesus says, go cast your nets in the deeper water, we give our fishing another try. And when Jesus says, leave it all on the shore, we will take up our cross and follow. Amen.
Amen.